The SWAC East tiebreakers are a little bit confusing, but I think that I made the most sense of it that I can. Oh, yeah. It's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Family, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, aka the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Now, we'll wrap up today's episode with a look at the MEAC, but we're going to kick it off with the SWAC West and SWAC East in a two-part, looking into the Southwestern Athletic Conference, kicking it off with the SWAC East, because I think that that's the most interesting division at the current time. Jackson State, Alabama State, FAMU. We're going to combine the three of them into one. I know typically we go school by school, but this tiebreaker, it affects all of them. So I think that that's the appropriate thing to look at, especially with the Jackson State versus Alabama State game on the horizon. This might not even matter 7 days from now, right? But these are the tiebreakers in the SWAC. In order, head-to-head competition between the tied teams. This is for a three-way tie. If they were to all tie at 6-2, I believe is what they would be at. So head-to-head. Then it'll be record of the tied teams within the division. To me, that's going to be the same because you lost. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So if Jackson State were to lose out, that would be to Alabama State and Alcorn. Alabama State's two losses are to FAMU and then also Grambling. FAMU's losses are to Jackson State and Prairie View. So with that being the case, all of them have the same overall conference record. They have the same divisional record. They have the same out-of-division record. Like, they all have the same here. So C comes in head-to-head competition versus the team within the division with the best overall. Well, there's a three-way tie at the top of the division. To me, in my opinion, that still moves on to the next thing. It says conference record and proceeding through, head-to-head competition versus the team within the division with the best overall conference record proceeding through the division. Multiple ties within the division will be broken from first to last. To me, that still gets bypassed. Cool. So now you have overall record versus non-division teams. That'll be the same. Then you get to E, combined record versus all common non-divisional teams. And I think this is where you finally get the split. In my opinion, Alabama State wins a three-way tie between Jackson State, FAMU, and Alabama State because tiebreaker, letter E, letter E, combined record versus all common non-divisional opponents. If I am off base on this, somebody please tell me. FAMU and Jackson State have both played Prairie View. Alabama State and FAMU will have both played Prairie View. In order for this to be a three-way tie, that would mean Alabama State has beaten Prairie View. That's the only non-divisional opponent that any of these teams share, right? Or they share Texas Southern. They both got beat by Texas Southern. Jackson State and FAMU beat TSU. But basically, that's where the separation would happen. That's the first time you have a difference in common non-divisional opponents, I think. That's the part where it gets really tricky. So if I'm correct, and letter E, combined record versus all common non-divisional opponents comes down to Alabama State versus PV and FAMU versus PV. That will go in the direction of Alabama State. Then it will break down to a two-team tiebreaker, and that will be head-to-head Alabama State. I could be wrong. I'm going to get some clarification on that, but that is what I believe is the case in the SWAC East. It's very complicated. I had to get all the way down to the letter E, but I found it. In my opinion, based on what I'm reading, Alabama State is the benefactor of a three-way tie. Now, for the rest of the SWAC East, as we run through them, Alabama A&M, for a team who really struggled offensively to start the season, to watch them have two 50-point games against FCS opponents, right? Like they scored 49 versus Kentucky State. That wasn't 50, so it doesn't factor into this conversation. But then also, it's not, you're going down a subdivision. Like that's not as impressive to me. But to put up 50 points on two different schools in the SWAC, for a team that couldn't get any offense going at the beginning of the year, I think that's really impressive. So you got to salute to Xavier Lankford because they came in, had a surging 38 versus Jackson State. You've seen them knock or put up 50 points twice, once against Bethune-Cookman, one this past week against UAPB. Like, you got to give them some love. That's impressive, right? And I know they may not be top of the conference or whatever, but to score 50 points twice in SWAC play is an impressive feat and should be championed. As for Mississippi Valley State, let's keep it simple with them. They played the best team in the conference, probably one of the three best teams in Black college football, probably, and they got beat, and they should have gotten beat. There's not a deep dive that needs to happen here. Jackson State is the better team. On to Bethune-Cookman. You really went toe-to-toe with the best team in the SWAC West. You went toe-to-toe with Southern. And it took it to multiple overtimes. To the point where you have to do the 2-point conversions back and forth. And have I told you how much I don't like that? I think I did when PV versus Grambling happened. I'm just not a fan of the sudden death penalty kick style of football, right? Let's leave that to football. This is football. Let's line them up at the 20 at the worst if we're talking college. And let's see who can go get a little miniature drive for a touchdown. That's me, though. I'm going to keep it simple because I don't want to get in my old man stuff. But I'll tell you the most impressive thing about Bethune-Cookman is over the last few weeks, they've really thrown the football well. Sometimes when teams struggle in a very specific aspect, you'll see a flare-up. You'll see a spark. You'll see a moment in which they do that one thing they struggled in well, and then it's gone and they're back to struggling. As for Bethune-Cookman, they've thrown the ball really well, whether it's Luke Sprague, whether it's Cam Ransom. It doesn't matter. They've thrown the ball really well over the last 3 or so weeks. And to me, that's very impressive. That's a testament to your coaching, in my opinion, for you to be able to come in and do that. So that's that. You're not going to see that on the stat sheet, or you're not going to see that in the record. But you got to give some props to them. That's very impressive, in my opinion. Now, as you push towards the SWAC West, I'm going to kick that off with my alma mater. TS, you. They're exactly what I knew. We're going to get into that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. The NFL is here and kicking, and boy, I'm telling you right now, it's a phenomenal season. I'm having a great time, and I think that you would have a better time if you allowed yourself to be entertained and paid at the same time. So when you leave that 60 minutes of, or really 3.5 hours if you're watching it, 60 minutes on the clock, but 3.5 hours of watching football with some more money in your pocket, you're probably going to be a happier person. So that's all you have to do, or that's all you have to want. And all you have to do is go to FanDuel.com. If you're new to FanDuel, you go ahead and put down a $5 bet. If it wins, if it hits, you get $150 back in bonus bets. It's that simple. It's not complicated. It's extremely easy. You just have to go and you have to do it. It's up to you. Do you want to make a little bit more cash on something that you know you're going to do every single week anyway? I certainly would. So if I were you, I'd be at FanDuel.com right now trying to get my $150 back in bonus bets to make every moment more. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, check out my brother's show, Locked On SEC. They are going to be breaking down all of the college football playoff ramifications, whether that's Bama's victory, whether that's Texas A&M's loss, whether that's Georgia's loss, whether that's UT in a potential SEC championship game. There's a lot of craziness in the Southeastern Athletic Conference, but let's stick to the Southwestern Athletic Conference. I'm going to start off with my alma mater, Texas Southern. I posed a challenge. I said I wanted to see exactly where they were, and for better or worse, they showed me. And that is that they are middle of the pack. I think that they could beat a team, right? They took Southern to the limits, right? But when it came to Alcorn, they got dusted. They got dusted when it came to Alcorn. And maybe when they play UABB at the end of the season, we'll see what happens there. But right now, I wanted to see if you could beat a solid team. And that's what I think Alcorn is. I think Alcorn is a solid team. However, however, Texas Southern scored a touchdown with minute and 54. Oh, yeah, it was a minute and 54 seconds. Because, fun fact, they scored 2 touchdowns in the game offensively. Both came with a minute and 54 seconds left in the half. So, with a minute 54 left in the second and then a minute 54 left in the fourth. Then they had a defensive touchdown. Offensively, they didn't really get too much going. It was not a good day. But I'll say this. I have to be, my word of the month is patient, right? Like my word of the month is being patient and understanding that I have to be patient with myself. So this is something a little bit more personal, right? Is understanding I have to be more patient with myself and understanding that everything's not going to be boom, 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 boom. I'm going to extend that same patience towards Texas Southern because I have to remember this is the first year of the Chris Dishman era. And if you end with a 500 record, that's a win. You should be happy about that. As a first year head coach, I think that's a good stepping stone. So I'm trying to remind myself to be patient, give myself room to grow, give the team room to grow, and not ask and demand for things immediately. As for Grambling, who's also dealing with a first year head coach, they finally got a close victory. Close games have been the dreaded enemy of Grambling this year. You look at it, right? So Texas Southern scores a touchdown late in the fourth against them. PV beats them in 5 overtimes. Bethune-Cookman beats them by 3. There was no point scored in the fourth quarter, but still a one-score game. Alcorn beats them on a field goal with time expiring. That's 4 losses in SWAC play. 4 losses in SWAC play. That honestly, if it just goes a different way a little bit, you're talking about Grambling a whole lot different, but they didn't. So this is how we're speaking about them. Finally, they get one to go their way. Alabama State drives down the field. They have a field goal attempt with a little less than a minute left. Grambling still would have got the ball back with 2 timeouts, and they could have had a chance to go score. But Alabama State had a chance to tie the game, and they missed the field goal. And it felt like the football gods were saying, this is all you needed, or this is what you've been waiting for. You've had so many valleys. Let me give you a peek, right? I know there's a story somewhere in there about, I'm not even gonna try to get into that because honestly, I was just gonna absolutely mess that story up and just blunder it to death. So I'm gonna leave it alone. But basically, I don't know if these moments are worth it because you have 4 tight losses and that impacted where you stand in the conference, but in general, this was finally a little bit of get back. This was finally Grambling being able to be the team that closes out a game. For Grambling to be the team that wins close, man. And was it a lucky break? I don't know. But at the end of the day, they got unlucky enough times where they deserved to be lucky, quite frankly. And I think they had a big play in which they stripped Kareem Key and allowed them to get that game-winning touchdown or that game-winning score. I can't remember if it was a touchdown or a field goal. So as for Grambling, I know you're probably sitting there when they drive down the field and it's like, oh, here we go. They're going to go to OT. And they're going to beat us in OT. But it didn't even happen that way. So shout out to Grambling. Can we keep this real quiet? Can we keep this really, really quiet? Prairie View A&M, quiet as kept, is going to have a slightly successful season if everything continues the way that it's going. Now, they could lose the next 2 games. They could lose to Alcorn. They could lose to Alabama State. And then we're having a different conversation completely. But as of right now, if they even go 1-1, they're going to have a 500 record in the conference. And it felt like that was a long shot of sorts. Honestly, it felt like that was a long shot of sorts at the beginning of the year. It felt like everything was going wrong for PV. But as I look back, it also was some moments, like they could have beat that. They could have won that Southern game. Moments make such a difference, right? The reason I say that is because I've had this, I don't want to call it a philosophy, but I've had this saying over the last, let's just say 2024. I don't know how long I've been saying it, but I've been saying it all this year. Context fades with time, right? And I don't think I came up with that. I don't think this is some foreign concept, but concept fades with time. So like you lose 5 close games within a year and now you have a losing record. Yeah, we'll remember that right when the season's over. We may even talk about it. Look at Grambling. Maybe we'll talk about it. But I feel like we stopped because as time goes on, it's like, well, we don't care if you lose all these close games. You're losing. Your record becomes your record. Like people have this saying, you are what your record reads. No, you're really not. Like that's actually so not true. Green Bay, the Green Bay Packers, and the New Orleans Saints had the same record last year. They were not the same team. So I don't agree with that. But at the end of the day, that is going to be your perception of whatever your record is. So PV, I ain't gonna lie, PV, I thought y'all were dead in the water. I didn't think y'all was gonna have any sort of successful year. Y'all might turn out to be second in the SWAC West, just like you were predicted. That's crazy to me. That is crazy to me from where you started off at. But okay. Anywho, as for Alcorn, they steamrolled TSU in the second half. They put up 28 second half points to really pull away from this one. And I think Xavier Vaughn had another Xavier Vaughn type of game. 170 through the air, 130 on the ground, 3 total touchdowns. You can't ask for too much more. The way that a dual threat quarterback threatens you, it's not many ways to replicate it unless you have it. That's just the way that I look at it. It's not many ways to replicate unless you actually have it. Now for for UAPB, they eliminated themselves. They can't win the SWAC West anymore. Neither can PV. There's only 2 teams who can win, right? We already knew TSU and Grambling were out. We held out a little bit of hope for UAPB. I think PV we knew was out of it as well. Now it's just Alcorn and Southern. But Pine Bluff eliminated themselves with their loss to Alabama A&M. Had that not happened, they still could have won out and won the SWAC West. It would have been a long shot, but they play Southern this week. They had a chance to knock off the Jaguars and then send the Jaguars into the Bayou Classic, needing a victory to win the SWAC West. That still could happen, but UAPB wouldn't be the benefactors of it. So let's move into that team right there. Southern. Southern does not want to go into that game against Grambling needing a victory to win the division. They don't. At the end of the day, they do not want to go into the Bayou Classic knowing they have to win. That's an ugly situation. Now, if Alcorn loses this week to PV, it doesn't matter. If Southern beats UAPB, it doesn't matter. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for a situation in which you can walk into the Bayou Classic playing for bragging rights and not playing for the SWAC championship. That's what or the SWAC championship appearance, a berth. That's what you're looking for. Tennessee State, they're 2 games into their 4-game ending stretch that we've talked about. They're 1-1. I would like to see them at least go 1-1 through the next 2 games, be 2-2 overall. It'd be the best record that he has in the month of November. And if you go 2-0 and go 3-1 overall in November, now that's different, because then you're looking at a chance at winning the Big South OVC, because you would have a tie with Southeast Missouri. You would have the tiebreaker, but then you would have to see what happens with UT Martin and where does UT Martin fall. So it's a big conversation, but if we're talking about conference titles, if we're talking about playoffs, you got to win these next 2 games. 1-1, I'll probably be happy and say you're taking a really good step up. Now, as we push forward, it's the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference time and the independents who left the MEAC. So let's do that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the only place I would send you to get any of your tickets, right? It doesn't matter if you want to go to a football game, right? I was talking to somebody earlier, and she was telling me about how her and her fiance were going to go to the Cowboys game. Luckily for her, she already told me that they already had tickets. Because if she didn't, I was going to tell you, have you heard of Game Time? Did you? Matter of fact, I should reach out and ask if she already has bought the tickets. Because Game Time You get $20 off your first purchase if you use the code Locked On College. You're going to be able to see your seat from the app, so you know everything that you'll be able to see, no showing up and having a blockade in your way. And you'll also get the best ticket deals because they have flash deals, zone deals. Because as I'm thinking about it, she didn't tell me she bought them already. She just told me that was the plan, and I assumed that she bought them already. It's time for me to ask her. Did you go to Game Time? Did you buy the tickets? If you didn't, revert to the first question and go to Game Time. That's what you should do as well. Download the app, create an account, and use the code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Let's get into this Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference and kick it off with the kings of the conference at the time. Or at the moment, excuse me. And what seems like is going to be the king of the conference for the rest of the year. I think that South Carolina State is going to be your MEAC representative in the Celebration Bowl. But last week against Howard, they just showcased how they can be so multiple from the wide receiver position. And having multiple good wide receivers is different than having multiple good running backs. If you have multiple good running backs, yeah, it allows your running attack to never really take a step back. If one guy has a bad day, another one can pick it up. You can allow your running backs to stay fresh, so you're constantly attacking the defense with people who have more energy than them. Like, these things are benefits of having multiple good running backs. But 9 times out of 10, you're not putting both of those, let's say 8 times out of 10, you're not putting both of those running backs on the field at once. You're not worrying about the threat of either one of them running. You're worrying about the threat of one running at a time. But when you have a guy like Einaj Carter, Justin Smith-Brown, Caden High, they're all on the field at the same time. You have to account for all 3 of South Carolina State's wide receivers at once, and that's what makes it so difficult, because it's difficult to account for one wide receiver. It gets really hard to account for 2. Now I have to account for all 3 of these guys, knowing that every single one of them can get loose, knowing that last week it just so happened to be Einaj Carter who took the deep shot from 63 or down to 63 yards for a touchdown, had over 100 yards on the game, when you know Caden High's been killing them all year. Like, it's these type of things. It's these type of things where you can't just worry about one. You can't key in on one. And that helps the South Carolina State passing game be way, way more explosive, in my opinion. As for North Carolina Central, you're still sitting at home wishing for the same thing. You would have liked a Howard win because it would have helped you avoid a 3-way tie. It would have put more pressure on both of the last 2 games for South Carolina State. But for Central, you're just hoping for a Morgan State win. That's all you can hope for. You're saying, please, Morgan State win out. If Morgan State can win out and I can win out, we can have a 3-way tie conversation. We'll see. We'll see. That's all you're looking for. As for Howard, I think the silver lining here, also, if Morgan State doesn't beat South Carolina State, I will be really interested to see how the playoff committee views North Carolina Central's playoff contention conversation. I think we may view that next week if North Carolina Central if Morgan State does not beat South Carolina State next week, and if North Carolina Central beats Howard. If both of those things happen next week, we will probably have a conversation about if North Carolina Central can make it into the playoffs. So as for Howard, I think the silver lining is that the defense played as well as they could. They were set up to fail too many times. They inherited short fields on multiple occasions. 2 interceptions inside the 40-yard line, their own 40-yard line. Defense in sudden change mode, can't allow anything. You're going to give up points. And they didn't allow anything, and they didn't give up points. Those are the things that I'm looking for, right? So Howard, they stopped the turn. They had a turnover on downs. They forced a fumble. They were getting at the ball. They did a really good job for what they were asked to do with the offense they were asked to do it against. That's the silver lining, in my opinion. I want to mix in the independents here before I get to the last 2 MEAC schools. North Carolina Central falls 31-3 to Villanova. It's the 3rd straight game in which they only scored 1 time. The first 2, they were touchdowns. This time it was a field goal. You haven't hit double digits in 3 weeks. It's not too much to say here other than that. Hampton finally dropped the game that wasn't close. They lost to Towson big, 27-10, and they scored a touchdown really late. So it was 27-3 for a large amount of the fourth quarter. This was a controlling game. I've seen Hampton lose a couple of games tight, right? Like one score games, high shootouts that ended in a 3-point win by the opposition. I've seen that. But at the same time, you can't stay close the whole time. And their offense has been shut down the past 2 weeks as well. They haven't been able to score 20, 30 points like you've been used to seeing them do. Now let's get back to the rest of the MEAC. Morgan State, don't look now. We talking about high points. Morgan State has scored 30 points in the last 2 weeks, back to back. I think you're used to somebody saying Morgan State has scored 30 points in the last 2 weeks, and it'd be a 16-point game and a 14-point game back to back. No, these guys have dropped 38 and 36 in back-to-back weeks, and this week they did it with nothing but offensive scores. You have to give some love to that. The week prior, it was Todd Smith. I thought he did a phenomenal job coming in. This week they ran with Deuce Taylor, but running is the way that they unlocked that offense because you had two runners. You had two runners on the day, and one of which was Miles Marie. He had 90 yards, right? So that's a good game. But then you also had Jason Collins, and Jason Collins had over 150. Oh, sorry, Marie had 79. I'm tripping. But I don't know why I thought I read 90. In my head, I remember 90, but in my notes, I wrote 79. But these are winning performances, man. These are winning performances by your running back. I can't believe that Morgan State is putting up high points. I also can't believe that they're putting up high points and being in close matchups. But hey, we're going to focus on this part for right now. Morgan State dropped 30 points back to back. You had a powerful running attack this week. The week prior, you had Todd Smith come in, and he did his thing through the air, and he threw some really nice passes. He led a really good fourth quarter drive. You're looking at offense getting it done for Morgan. Man, let's clap it up for Morgan, man. That's impressive, sincerely. And then as for Delaware State, you got outscored by Morgan State. And I know that's probably weird. I don't even know if it's an insult because you've done it back-to-back weeks if you're Morgan State. So I don't know if that's insulting to say you got outscored by them. But it is tough. It's a tough pill to swallow because point-wise, you hit 28. Your quarterback had 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jaden Sutton had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. You had 2 receivers over 90 yards, and you lose to Morgan State. You don't expect that. There's nothing deep to say. I don't think Delaware State is a great team, but to have that is crazy to me. That is a very difficult pill to swallow. And then as for Norfolk State, just like North Carolina Central, you sat there at home. Not too much to say about the week. You're not waiting for somebody to lose, but you went loss, win, loss in MEAC play this year. The pattern would suggest that a win is next. They play Delaware State. Delaware State has not won a game. We'll see how that goes. That has been our HBCU circuit. Thank you so much for going on this with me. SWAC East, tiebreakers. In the SWAC West, Southern's a game away from clinching. And in the Morgan State, salute you, man. Back-to-back 30-point games. Tomorrow's episode, we will be breaking down Howard versus North Carolina Central because their season is on the line for the Eagles. Playoff hopes, Celebration Bowl hopes. With a loss, both of those are dashed. Let's get into that on tomorrow's episode. In the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.